What's going on, guys? Guys here. Welcome back to another video. Now in today's video, in this offensive tutorial, we are going to go over off the ball movement. How do you trigger a player to make a run going forward, or how do you trigger a player to come close to you when you have the ball? So if you're ever inside a game and let's say for example your attack is standing still, how can you get them moving? Now this is arguably the most important thing in terms of attack. It's very simple. So we're going to go through the basic examples of how to do it, and then we're going to go through some in-game examples where I explain to you the more nitty-gritty. But the first thing is, well, how do you do it? Now the first one is called player support. Now it's very simple. All you do is you face a player and you simply press the R1 or the RB button on your controller. Now what will happen is that the player that's close towards you, that you're trying to trigger to come towards you, he will raise his hand, and that means that he's going to come and walk towards you. This of course very effective. So if you've got no one to pass to, your players are too far away, you can always bring a player close by pressing the R1 button. In contrast, the trigger run is the quite opposite. So instead of bringing a player close, you want a player to make a run going forward and making a run behind, you press the L1 button, or you press LB if you're on Xbox. Very simple, but this right here is the most important thing. If there's one thing in terms of being offensive, sometimes the game, whether not only if you're attacking, but if you're trying to build up, the players don't move by themselves. So if you want to create movement, the best thing to do is to trigger runs with the L1 or the LB button, and that player will make a run in behind. So for example, like here, you can see I trigger this player. He then pushes his arm out going forward, starts making a run towards my opponent goal, and I can very simply pass the ball to him. So it's so effective in building up play and creating space. Okay, we're going to go over some examples for calling a player short. I'm going to let this clip play on. This is just me spamming the player call short button. As you can see, a lot of players are coming towards me. Now, the most important thing when you're doing a player to come short, now the reason why I don't use it that much is that the problem is when you call a player going short, it invites pressure. The reason why is if a player comes towards you, the defenders will come towards you as well, and that will apply more pressure on the ball. So I always find that if I do use this, I use this quite sparingly. If I've really got no one to pass to, then I may call a player short. Otherwise, normally I just pass backwards and just try to recycle the ball instead. But let's say, for example, if I wanted to call a player short, if I face a player, I can basically, in theory, call anyone short. So I can call this player, either one of those. Now, what happens is when you call them short is they stick their hand out and then they come to, so like a second Mbappe over there. See how he came towards me? So what Mbappe does, you can see when he comes towards me, the defender also somewhat comes towards me as well. So that's what I mean by it invites pressure. So let's say if you want to pass the ball to someone, or if you haven't got space, or let's say someone is running offside and you want them to come back onside, then you can, for example, call a player short like that, and then they can get into space and you can pass the ball to them. Might be a tiny bit effective if, for example, you're getting pressed and you've got no other options and you need an option to pass to. You can always call a player towards you with the R1 or the RB button. Okay, so now we're going to go over an L1 trigger example. So this is arguably the most effective thing when you're attacking to do. Now, when you get the ball, for example, with one of your cams or your strikers, the most common thing everyone says to me is, why don't my players make runs forward? Well, that's why the L1 trigger is so effective. All you have to do basically is face one of these players and press the L1, or if you're on Xbox, the LB, and that player will make a run going forward. In fact, you can actually trigger up to, I think, 3 players before the game kind of just stops running one of the players. So you can basically trigger as many players in theory as you want. So if you just spam the L1 button, then everyone will start making runs going forward. So when you go into your next game, just spam the L1 button to see how those players make movements. But you see, for example here, if you're trying to create an attack and you want your player or your striker to make a run in behind, the best thing to do is the L1 button. Otherwise, they're just going to stand there. So you can see, for example, like here, I make the pass to my cam. Once I get the ball to my cam or to your centre mid, don't forget you can use with any player on the pitch. I wait and I see that there's Dembele in front of me. What I do is I face him, I press the L1 button, and you see how Dembele makes a run in behind. Now, what that also does is it forces your opponent to make a decision. He has to either then run back to track the run, or he comes towards you. If he comes towards you, you can then make a pass to the striker making a run in behind. If he then decides to track the run, it's all about timing to make the pass, but if not, it creates more space for you to run into. So the key thing with L1 trigger is that it's used to create space. it basically forces your opponent to make a decision. And you can see here when I press the L1 trigger, if I press play, I just then time the run and then I get a through ball in behind. But you see that entire situation will never have happened if, more importantly, Dembele didn't make a run. And the only way Dembele made a run is because I triggered that with the L1 button. Now, in theory, you could trigger anyone on the pitch. So it uses both for the L1 and the R1, but it's a bit more, it makes a bit more sense on the L1 button. If you want to trigger anyone, let's say for example, if you want to trigger this player, you'll move your left analog stick down. And then what you'll do is you'll press the L1 button at the same time. Or if you're on Xbox, you press the LB button. So basically like player switching, but with the left analog stick. So you're effectively choosing anyone on the pitch. So let's say, for example, if I wanted to trigger this player to make a run, which is Son, what I'll do is I'll move my left analog stick down and then I'll press the L1 button and Son will make that run going forward. And if you're just facing a player and you press the L1 button with just facing a player, then a player that you're facing, for example like here, Dembele, press the L1 button, he sticks his hand out saying he's going to make a run, and then it's just about me to time the pass to then make a killer pass in behind so you can get through on goal. We're going to go another example of the L1 triggers. Have a look at this one. So as you can see, when I get the ball going forward, you can see I use the L1 button to help create the attack. I'm using a combination of 1, 2 as well, but you can see how many times I press the L1 button. This is how many times I do it. I don't rely on the game to make movement for me. I like to do it myself. A bit of trickery inside the box to get the goal. But let's talk about how it's even used in the build-up play. So when I got the ball over there, I made a pass, okay? Then I made a pass with Fred. Now, if I make a pass to Llorente, there is a chance that my opponent, in theory, there's a chance my opponent can then get the ball off me. I want Llorente to run into this space so then I can pass the ball in front of him. Does that make sense? So not only in the attack is it important, it's also important in the build-up phase. So you can see like here, I press the L1 button. Then as you can see, I'm facing towards Llorente. So Llorente is the player that then makes a run going forward. And as you can see, he runs forward a bit and that's enough for me now to make the pass going forward. You see that? If I never did an L1 trigger, there is a big chance my opponent's defender could have switched that player and intercepted the ball. But with doing the L1 trigger, he makes that run in front and then that gives me that edge. Then when I get the ball over here, it's almost the same thing over here. So if I let this play on now, if I get the ball, I do the same thing now. You see that? When I get the ball with Son, you see I'm doing L1 triggers off the ball. So watch, before the ball even comes to me, I'm also doing an L1 trigger. So watch Lucas over here. Before the ball arrives to my feet, I do the L1 trigger. So you don't have to have the ball in your feet. Let's say the ball, you're passing the ball with Llorente, for example, like here. If you want to trigger a player off the ball to make a run, look at my left analog stick. It's facing up. Do you see that? So what it's basically saying to the game is, okay, I want the player above me, over here, to make a run going forward. And you can see what this does is, if you trigger it before the ball arrives to you, is you can start a running sequence. So look over here, you can see Lucas Moura. You can see he then puts his hand out and he starts running. So now it acts as a distraction. And I'm pressing the L1 button again. And you can see when I get the ball here with Ben Yedder, I do the same thing again. I'm doing the L1 trigger to Lucas. And I'm not using Lucas. I don't want to pass the ball to him, but he's just as a distraction, you see. He keeps that defender occupied and that defender away. And that allows me to create a 1v1 situation. See how now this defender can't come towards me? He has to stay with Lucas. And this allows me to do a little bit of trickery inside the box to create the space. So that's why it's used very heavily to create space and to create many attacking opportunities. Let's look at one example from a build-up phase, for example, here again with the L1 trigger. So you can see here, when I get the ball, I make a pass going backwards and then I pass the ball back to Llorente. Now here, as you can see, both my attackers are not really doing anything. But what I do with Llorente, as you can see here, is I press the L1 button. Dembele now makes the run in behind. And you see how my opponent is then having to run back to defend those angles. And all I have to do is then time the pass. See that? It came from a situation where there wasn't that much danger to trigger a player, creating a dangerous situation, giving myself space and creating a through ball in behind. And then also, you can see here, let's say the guy inside the box, he's not making a run going forward. You see, he's there, but he's not making a run I want him to. I can also trigger that player to make a run going forward. The exact same thing. I use my left analog stick facing down, triggering him. And watch, those two players inside the box, look at Ben Yedder. See how his arm sticks out? He's calling for the pass. That means you trigger the run. And that way I can pass the ball to him. And then unfortunately I end up missing. But you see I would never got into that situation, both for the through ball down the wing and for the pass in the middle without the L1 trigger. Now in the final example, I want to go with my favorite way to score goals using the fake shot and a combination of the L1 trigger. You can see in this phase how not only do I use L1 triggers, I also do 1-2s. L1-2s is L1 plus X. I've already gone through this in my passing phase where I explained this, but it's the exact same thing is achieved. And then when I get the ball over here, I'll walk you through what exactly I do. But here, the key thing is the L1 trigger with Son. Son makes a run towards goal. Then I take a fake shot and then I score. But you see the exact same thing happen over here. When I was building up, I built up normally. The driven pass here, did a 1-2 there. Dembele made a run it behind. If Dembele wasn't making a run, I could still trigger it manually. Then when I made the pass going forward and I brought the ball back, you see Son, my striker, he's not in a good position. He's probably, the defensive line is there and he's here. I want Son to be here. That way he can do a shot towards goal. So the way I get Son inside the box is I press the L1 button. Now what that does is it moves his defensive line from position number 1 to position number 2. Why is because Son runs from number 1 to number 2. So it gets him closer to the box. How do I do that? Of course with the L1 trigger. So again I face Son and I press the L1 button. You see now Son starts making a run going forward, and now when I pass the ball to Son directly to his feet, he's already facing forward. Not only is it used to trigger a run, it's also used to make the player run forward and face forward. That way when I pass the ball to him, I can do a skill move and then take a shot towards goal. Probably the most effective thing, go into the game and just try pressing the L1 button. You will see players make movement. Just be careful, don't trigger, for example, your left back, right back, or your CDMs, because that's risky. But in the attacking phases, trigger all your attackers, and you will see it will make a big, massive difference when you attack. Anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed that video, and that is, of course, a fence tutorial on triggering runs and calling players short.